Hello and welcome to Skyline, ladies and gentlemen. I'm dritiatri. Now, tonight we are looking at 14 stories once again. 14 developments unfolding across America, India, the UK. And at first they may sound completely unrelated, but let me tell you, they are all connected by just one common theme. How Indians abroad, they are dealing with every policy change, every immigration story, and every obstacle. So let's start with it. First of all, if you are working in tech on an H-1B visa, there is one number that you need to remember right now. Well, 60 days. I know we have talked a lot about these 60 days, but the 2026 layoff, the tech layoff, well, it has crossed massive milestone. Now, we have discussed this story in the past, 127,000 job cuts. But let me tell you here, ladies and gentlemen, the 2026 tech layoff wave has crossed a massive milestone with more than 127,000 job cuts reported across hundreds of companies. And what makes this different from the earlier layoff is that many companies are not simply cutting costs because business is weak. Well, they are reconstructing because billions of dollars are being redirected towards artificial intelligence, automation, and even AI infrastructure. Well, look at some of the biggest names in technology today. Well, Apple has reportedly cut positions linked to Siri and Vision Pro as it reshapes its AI strategy. TikTok, well, it has carried out another round of layoffs affecting engineering and e-commerce team. Then comes LinkedIn. LinkedIn has also reduced engineering roles, so these are not just sales or administrative jobs that are disappearing. Core technology roles are also affected too. And for an H-1B worker, losing that job, it is not just a career problem. It can quickly become an immigration problem too. Once employment formally ends, the H-1B worker generally has about 60-day grace period, subject to the applicable rule and individual circumstances. And here's the most important part. Severance pay does not necessarily mean that your immigration clock has stopped. What matters is your official employment status and termination date. And that is why foreign workers need to know their visa timeline before a reconstruction that happens. Because in today's tech industry, your next job search, it may have to happen alongside your immigration strategy. And this brings us to another question. What happens when the person who already has US citizenship suddenly finds the government questioning how that citizenship was actually obtained? Well, for years, getting a US passport was seen as the final destination for many immigrants. You study in America, you build a career, get a green card, complete the naturalization process, and finally take the oath. But now the US government is putting renewed focus on denaturalization cases. That's right, the Department of Justice has been pursuing civil cases where it alleges that citizenship was obtained illegally or through any material misrepresentation. These cases can involve serious immigration fraud. It can involve false information, identity issue, or other allegations that are connected to the original immigration process. And yes, this is important for the Indian diaspora because many Indian professionals, they spend maybe years moving through the immigration system, from H-1B to green card to citizenship. Well, the key issue is that becoming a citizen does not erase allegations about how that citizenship was actually obtained. If the government claims that material information, it was deliberately hidden or false information was provided during the immigration process, it can ask a federal court to revoke naturalization. Now, that does not mean every naturalized citizen is suddenly at risk, but it does mean that people with complicated immigration histories should take their oath seriously. Previous H-1B applications, employment record, marriages, tax filing, and immigration forms, it can all become important part if questions are raised. Well, for immigrants, paperwork is not just paperwork. It cannot be. It can become a record of your entire journey. As while Washington is reviewing immigrants' past, New Delhi has just created another controversy. this time involving a state leader's planned trip to the United States. A major Indian state was preparing for an American tour, with meetings planned around technology, education, investment, and global partnership. And then at the very last moment, the US, well, they cancelled it. That's what happened with Telangana's Chief Minister A. Ravant Reddy's planned US visit, after the Ministry of External Affairs did not grant political clearance for the American portion of the entire trip. In the meantime, the UK portion of the visit, that was clear, but the proposed US program, that was stopped. In the meantime, the MEA said that the proposed program was not appropriate to the office held and the purpose of the visit. However, let me tell you here, Telangana pushed back strongly and described the whole decision as political. Ladies and gentlemen, the disagreement, it therefore became more than a simple trip cancellation. It's a big deal. He is the Chief Minister of an Indian state. It raises question about how much freedom state governments have when they want to build relationship directly with a foreign government, universities, and companies. Now the question is, why shouldn't Indians in America care about that? They should, because the planned visit was not only about politics. It was about investment. It was about universities, technology, and global capability centers. Well, the Telangana delegation had planned engagements with institutions and companies with the larger goal of bringing more and more education partners, more and more research collaborations, and more technology investment into Hyderabad. For the Telugu diaspora in America, this is therefore more than a cancelled political trip. Business meetings, community events, and investment discussions also had to be reconsidered. Hyderabad, it has increasingly positioned itself as a major technology and GCC destination. So international outreach can have a direct impact on jobs, investment, and corporate expansion as well. Here the biggest story, it is about how India's federal foreign policy machinery actually works. State governments may want to build an international partnership, but when a chief minister of an Indian state travels abroad, New Delhi still has a major role in deciding what kind of diplomatic engagement is appropriate. Well, this creates a very delicate balance between state-level economic ambition and India's broader foreign policy position. And yes, now from a cancelled political trip, we move to something that could directly affect thousands of Indian travelers, and we are going to talk about US visas. The Trump administration is preparing another major immigration crackdown, and this time the focus, it is on people who entered America on B1 or B2 business and tourist visas and later applied for asylum. Reports indicate that the US government could review visas issued between 2016 and 2026, where the holders substantially filed asylum claims in the US. Well, the potential scale, that is significant. Up to about 2 lakh foreign nationals, they could be affected by this, although the final policy could change and legal challenges are expected further. But the important point is that this would represent a major expansion of scrutiny over people who initially entered the United States as temporary visitors, but later on sought a very different immigration pathway. Now, think about the Indian perspective here. Thousands of Indians travel to America every single year on visitors visa. They go for tourism, business meetings, family visit, short stay. Well, some parents travel to meet their children, their grandchildren. Business professionals, they travel for conferences and meetings too. So naturally, any large-scale review of B1 and B2 visa, that creates questions for Indian community. But here's an important distinction here. Well, this is not about saying that every Indian tourist or business traveler is suddenly in danger. The focus is on people whose immigration circumstances, they changed after entering the country and who substantially sought the asylum. Sadly, many Indians falsely claim for asylum. In the meantime, the US government says it wants to identify people who entered the United States claiming to be a temporary visitor, but later on attempted to remain permanently over there through asylum applications. Ladies and gentlemen, for Indian travelers, the lesson quite simple. A visitor visa is for temporary travel. It is not a guarantee of permanent entry or permanent stay. A visa also does not automatically guarantee admission at the airport. Because let's be honest here, immigration officers, they can examine the purpose of travel and the circumstances of the visit. So for somebody who's traveling to America, maintaining accurate documentation and most importantly, being truthful about the purpose of your trip, that becomes extremely important. And yes, speaking of the visitors to America, one American visitor has sparked a very different kind of conversation. And yes, not about visas this time, but about Delhi airport. Well, an American tourist's experience at Delhi airport, it has kind of triggered a huge online debate. California-based architect Damon Zumbrogel, he described Delhi airport immigration as torture, and he criticized what he called a kind of money gauntlet involving duty-free shops and commercial counters. Well, his comments quickly traveled across social media with people comparing Delhi's airport experience with the airports in America, Europe, or even Australia. In the meantime, some actually agreed. They agreed with his criticism. Others pushed back, arguing that large international airports are complicated spaces where immigration, where security, where retail, and where passenger movement they all operate all together. And this is where the whole story it becomes interesting. The question is this really about one tourist having a bad experience, or is it about how India wants its international airports to be perceived further? Well, New Delhi has become one of India's major global gateways. Millions of passengers, they pass through it, including tourists, including business travelers, NRIs, and foreign investors too. Well, for many international visitors here, an airport, it is their very first physical experience of the entire country. So that basically means immigration counters, queues, security, and the overall passenger journey that can influence how they perceive India. They make an opinion right at the airport gate. And yes, at the very same time, airport rankings are not based on any one person's experience here. They look at multiple factors including facility, service, connectivity, and passenger satisfaction. So the viral complaint, it may be personal this time, but it has opened a much bigger conversation about India's global image and the experience of people who are entering our nation. India is investing heavily in aviation infrastructure, and airports are increasingly becoming part of the country's international brand now. So, when a foreign traveler, he complains publicly, the debate that naturally becomes bigger than just one airport queue. And yes, ladies and gentlemen, while one American is complaining about entering India, thousands of Indians are now asking a very different question. How much will it cost to enter America for work? Well, for Indian tech workers dreaming of an American career, the H-1B visa has traditionally been one of the biggest pathways into the US tech industry. But now, the price that is attached to that particular pathway, it could become dramatically higher. The US Department of Homeland Security has proposed a $103,265 fee for the H-1B cap subject petition, including petition for highly educated workers with advanced degrees. Can you imagine that? That is an enormous amount of money that is involved here. And naturally, Indian professionals are asking just one basic question. Who will pay for it? Well, the proposed fee applies to the petition process, so the financial impact on an individual worker, that can depend on how the employer structures the hiring and immigration cost. But yes, there is no doubt that a six-figure government charge, it could make companies think twice, maybe thrice, before sponsoring certain workers here. Employers could compare the cost of hiring an H-1B worker with the hiring of somebody who's already authorized to work in America. And for companies operating on tight budgets, that calculation, it could become very, very important. And remember here, Indians have historically been among the biggest beneficiaries of the H-1B system. 70%. That much H-1B visas have gone to Indians. Indian engineer, software developer, data scientists and other professions. They make up major share of H-1B applicants. So this is not simply an immigration story. It could become a business decision further. If hiring an international worker that becomes dramatically more expensive, well, some companies could choose local talent now. Others could shift their work to India. Some may simply reduce sponsorship. Well, there is another bigger question about the future of American technology today. US companies have historically relied on international talent to fill specialized roles. If immigration becomes more expensive, companies may respond by changing where they hire, where they build their teams, and where they establish technology centers further. So if the cost of working in America that keeps on rising, the next generation may start asking another question here. Is studying in America still worth it or not? Well, for decades, the American dream for Indian students was almost automatic. Get into a good university, fly to the United States, complete your degree, find a job, build a career. That was the perfect Indian plan. But that equation is now changing. A new report shows that the number of Indian students who are applying for undergraduate program in the United States specifically, it has fallen by 15%. And at the very same time, international applicants overall, they have also declined. And there are several reasons behind this particular change. Visa uncertainty, rising education cost, difficulty in finding jobs after graduation, concerns around immigration, and now the possibility of a $100,000 fee connected to the optional practical training, OPT, which by the way allows the eligible international students to work after graduation. For Indian families, this is a major calculation. Studying in America can already cost a huge amount. Add tuition fee, add accommodation, add insurance, travel, and add living expenses. And yes, then comes the question, will these students actually be able to stay and work after graduation or not? Well, if the answer becomes uncertain, then families may start comparing the United States with other destinations where post-study work rules, they are perceived as more predictable and not this uncertain. Well, let me tell you here, India remains one of the largest source of international students in America today. That means this is also an economic story for the US universities and local universities. International students pay tuition fee, they rent the accommodation, they spend money locally, and they contribute to university research and other activities. So can you imagine? If fewer Indian students choose America, then the impact that is not limited to the Indian families. Well, the American education system benefits a lot from international students. But if immigration becomes too expensive or uncertain, students have other options too. Well, they can simply choose another country. While students are reconsidering America, undocumented immigrants are facing an entirely different reality. ICE enforcement. 3 more Gujarat origin Indians have reportedly ended up in an ICE custody after being arrested by the local authorities in the United States. Well, the cases involve Komal Patel, Hasmukh Patel, and Amit Patel, although the circumstances and allegations differ in each case. One of the individuals, Komal Patel, was reportedly arrested in Wisconsin and is now facing an allegation involving contact with a minor. The other 2 individuals, they were also reportedly placed under immigration hold, although the available information that does not establish the same allegation against these 2 remaining Indians. And wait, this distinction, it is extremely important. An immigration hold is not itself a proof of guilt. Local criminal charges and immigration proceedings are very separate from legal processes. But for undocumented immigrants, the message extremely clear. Local arrest can have immigration consequences. ICE can become involved when somebody is already in immigration system or has an outstanding removal issue, depending on the person's status and immigration history. Even an encounter with local law enforcement, it can potentially bring immigration authorities into the whole picture. And yes, this is why the Indians and Gujarati communities in America are watching these cases so closely here. Many undocumented migrants have pending asylum claims or maybe work permit, and some may believe that a minor local offense, it will not affect their immigration status at all. Let me burst your bubble here. That assumption, it can be dangerous. Immigration enforcement has become more aggressive in several parts of the United States, and undocumented communities are increasingly worried about what happens after an arrest. And yes, at the very same time, every single case has to be examined individually. A person with a valid immigration status, is or she is not automatically treated the same way as somebody who has final removal order or no lawful status. The legal history, immigration record, and nature of any criminal case, it can all matter. But the broader message, that is clear. Undocumented migrants are facing greater uncertainty, and immigration enforcement, it is not the only issue here. The Trump administration is also looking at something that every working immigrant understands too well: tax refunds. Well, now we move from immigration law to something much closer to the wallet. The Trump administration is considering changes that could restrict access to certain refundable tax credit for some immigrants here. The Treasury Department and IRS have proposed changes that could affect people who currently receive refunds through credits such as child tax credit, American Opportunity Tax Credit, and earned income tax credit, also depending on their immigration and tax status, both of them. In the meantime, ladies and gentlemen, the government argues that certain federal benefits that should be prioritized for Americans only. But here, tax experts, they warn that millions of people, they could potentially feel the impact of this change. And yes, here's the important part. A tax credit is not always the same thing as a government handout. Well, some credits reduce the amount of tax a person owes, while refundable credit, it can result in money that is being paid back when the credit exceeds the tax liability here. So basically, for lower income immigrant families, losing the refundable portion, that could be significant. And this could definitely affect people with different immigration situations. Again, depending on the final rules, including some people with pending asylum cases, temporary protected status, or DACA. Well, the exact impact, it will depend on the final legal language and who qualifies under the new requirements. So this is not simply a question about immigration status. It also involves tax filing status, eligibility rule, and the type of credit that is being claimed here. Well, the broader message is that immigration policy, it is no longer just about visas or border. It is also moving into taxes, into healthcare, benefit, and financial life here. For immigrant families, this means changes in Washington. It can affect not only whether they can stay in America anymore or not, but it also matters how much money they receive back at the tax time. And yes, that brings us to the case that shows just how complicated immigration status it can become, even when you already have a green card. Well, a green card is called permanent residence, but for many immigrants, it feels like the moment they finally have security in America. But a green card does not mean immunity from immigration enforcement. Well, consider the case of Breta, basically a Polish national who has held a green card since 2003, but was detained by ICE after authorities raised a question about her criminal and immigration history. Her daughters are American citizens, yet her family has struggled to receive her release. You know why? Let's talk about that now. Well, authorities have cited old retail theft cases and allegations concerning immigration paperwork. However, her family has now argued that she already dealt with those particular matters and that the offences, they were just a minor one. In fact, her case highlights something very, very important for every permanent resident. Old mistakes do not necessarily disappear simply because years have passed now. Well, immigration authorities can examine an individual's broader history, and here, particularly when there is any criminal conduct or alleged misrepresentation that is involved. Now, for Indian green card holders, this is particularly relevant. Criminal record, immigration misrepresentation, cases with violence or other legal issues, it can create complication when applying for citizenship or facing immigration proceedings further. And international travel, it can sometimes bring additional scrutiny here. A permanent resident who has a very complicated criminal or immigration history, well, they may face questions when returning to the United States. The message is not that every green card holder should panic here. The message is that permanent residence is a legal status with responsibilities attached to it. And sometimes, even a relatively small old issue, it can return years later. Well, for anybody with a complicated history, getting proper legal advice before international travel or citizenship application, it can be very, very important. Which, by the way, brings us to another warning for Indians who are traveling to America. Medical bills. A woman from Gujarat traveled to America on a long-term visitor visa to stay with her daughter in Pennsylvania. Well, during the trip, she became ill and she needed hospital treatment. Well, her daughter reportedly did not pay the hospital bill and did not respond to subsequent notices as well. The mother, the Indian mother, eventually returned to India, but when she later attempted to enter America again, she was reportedly stopped at the airport. She had her visa cancelled and she was sent back to India. The case, it has raised serious question about how unpaid medical expenses, it can affect future travel and immigration decision. Now, let's be very, very clear here. Not every unpaid hospital bill, it automatically leads to deportation. Immigration consequences depend on very specific facts here. Legal status and actions taken in an individual case. An unpaid medical debt or an immigration violation, they are not automatically the same thing. You know what? A person's financial history and credibility, it can still become relevant in certain immigration contexts here. But yes, the financial reality of American healthcare, it is very much real. The medical emergency in the US, it can become extremely expensive without any adequate insurance. Ambulances, hospital stay, test, procedure, it can quickly add up. A visitor who believes a short trip, a family trip maybe, it will be inexpensive. It can suddenly face a very large medical bill after one unexpected emergency. And this is why Indian visitors, particularly older parents traveling to see their children, they need to understand the importance of appropriate travel medical insurance and financial planning. Because when you travel internationally, you are not only carrying your passport, you are also carrying the financial responsibility for the risks that come with that specific journey. And yes, sometimes the problem isn't even the hospital bill. It can be a simple traffic ticket or an unpaid legal obligation or maybe a missed court date. These matters can create complication depending on the circumstances. Well, the immigration system can look at the bigger picture here, and that brings us to the very different kind of debate among Indians abroad. Should Indians still encourage students to go to America or not? An NRI tech professional has sparked a heated online debate about claiming that many Indians living abroad, specifically America, they discourage students from coming to America. You know why? Because they do not want more competition. These are not my words. Amarnath Shiva Shankar, describing himself as an NRI, he argues that students should not automatically reject the idea of studying abroad simply because somebody already living overseas tell them that the market is now difficult. His argument was straightforward. Look at the university. After that, understand the cost, check the campus recruitment, and make an informed decision. And honestly, that is where the whole conversation becomes more interesting than a viral statement here. The question is Is America still worth for Indian students or not? And let me tell you honestly, there is no one answer for that. For some students, a US university can provide excellent education, research opportunity, global exposure. For others, the cost, it may simply not make any kind of sense, specifically if the career prospects after graduation that are uncertain. And students today have more choices than ever before. It's not just the UK that is offering all these courses. Many nations, Canada, the UK, Europe, Australia, in fact, proudly saying India itself, universities around the globe are competing for international students now. So students can now compare tuition, scholarship, job opportunity, post-study work rights, and long-term immigration pathway before making any sort of their life decision. So yes, instead of asking, is America good or bad? Students, they should be asking a more practical question. Does this specific university, this specific course, or this specific financial investment make sense for me? Because studying abroad should be a decision based on facts, not fear or not FOMO. And yes, while international students, they are deciding where to go, Indian families already living between countries are facing another challenge now: moving money across the border. If you are an NRI or an Indian family transferring a large amount of money from India to another country, this is a story that you should watch very closely. India's tax authorities are increasing scrutiny of outward foreign remittance, particularly transactions that appear suspicious or inconsistent with a person's financial record. The idea is very simple. If large amount of money are moving overseas, authorities want to know where that money came from, why is it being transferred, and whether the appropriate taxes and disclosures have been made or not. For genuine Indians who are living in America, Canada, or anywhere, this is becoming specifically important when money comes from property sales, inheritance, fixed deposit, or other Indian asset. Well, the key question is always source of the fund. The questions are, can you show where the money came from? Can your bank records support the transaction? Do your tax return match the information provided to the authorities? These are very important questions, by the way. And this is specifically important when an NRI is selling an inherited property in India and wants to transfer the proceeds abroad. Well, the transaction may involve property documentation, capital gains calculation, tax deduction, banking record, and remittance paperwork. A mismatch between these records, it can create unnecessary questions later on. Well, ladies and gentlemen, the cross-border money movement, it is becoming increasingly transparent because tax authorities in different countries, they now exchange more and more information. So if you're moving money between India and America, Britain, the UAE, or any other country on this planet Earth, don't treat the transaction like a simple bank transfer. The money may cross the border in seconds. The paperwork can follow it for years. And yes, from India, we now move to Britain, where Indian students and graduates are facing another kind of immigration challenge. Let's talk about that. If you are an Indian student in the UK or planning to move from a student visa to a graduate route, there is an important change that you need to understand. The UK government has tightened rules around graduate dependents. Yes, under the updated rule, overseas spouses and children, they generally cannot simply be added after the main applicant has already switched from a student visa to the graduate route, until and unless they meet the specific requirement and were already dependent under the relevant student route. And yes, there is an important exception here. Children born in the UK to parents that are holding the graduate visa status, they now have a clearer route just to apply as dependents from inside the country under the updated rule. This distinction matters. Why? Because international families often make major life decisions during the period between graduation and finding long-term sponsorship. Well, for Indian families, this means immigration planning, it increasingly has to happen before a major visa transition. If you are moving from student status to graduate status, don't wait until the last moment to think about your spouse, your children, your future sponsorship option. Understand the rule before making any sort of decision about your family. Bringing family members to Britain, that is not easy. You have to follow all the rules and regulations. And yes, there is another issue too. The graduate route itself is facing broader changes now, with the government planning to reduce post-study work period for many graduates, while PhD graduates retain longer rights. For Indian students, this means the old strategy of study first, figure out the job later. It may no longer be enough. You may need to think about sponsorship, career option, and long-term immigration status much earlier. And yes, that brings us to the bigger picture, ladies and gentlemen, because whether we are talking about America or Britain, whether we are talking about H-1B workers or international students, whether we are talking about green card holders or NRI moving money home, one thing is absolutely clear. The era of easy migration, it is definitely changing, and staying updated, that should be your priority. The world is still connected. Talent still moves, money still moves, students still cross the border, but governments are asking more questions. Who are you? Where did your money come from? In fact, how did you get your visa? What did you disclose? And two more important questions. How long do you plan to stay, and what happens after your current status expires? Well, for Indians living abroad, that means the immigration story is no longer just about getting a visa. It is about managing an entire cross-border life. I'm Dritiatri, this is Skyline. Stay informed, stay updated, and I'll see you in the next one.